Tomorrow morning, every insect on Earth vanishes. It doesn't fade. It doesn't vanish region by region. Every bee, every fly, every beetle disappears. All at the exact same moment, across the planet. The silence hits first. Nothing buzzes. Nothing hums. Then the consequences begin cascading through systems that have depended on these tiny creatures for millions of years. Before we dive into this scenario, drop a comment about where you're listening from. I read every single one. Knowing where these stories reach helps shape future explorations. If you enjoy these late-night thought experiments, consider subscribing, but only if these deep dives genuinely interest you. What unfolds is a countdown. 6 months from the moment insects disappear to the collapse of human civilization itself. The first crisis begins before most people notice the silence. A farmer walks her apple orchard at sunrise. Yesterday's air buzzed with constant motion. Today, perfect silence surrounds thousands of flowering trees. Her boots crunch through morning frost toward the nearest cluster of blossoms. She reaches for a pink, white flower. The petals feel normal. The pollen sits ready. Everything looks exactly as it should. Her orchard has bloomed like this for years. But no bee will visit these flowers today. The farmer moves between rows of trees. Apple, cherry, pear, all heavy with blossoms that will never become fruit. She touches branch after branch. The flowers hang there like small white promises that can never be kept. Her phone begins ringing. Other orchard owners call with the same discovery. The silence isn't local. Down the road, strawberry fields stretch red and green. The plants look healthy. Their white flowers dot the rows like scattered stars. A field worker kneels beside a perfect plant. The berries already forming will be the last this field ever produces. Grocery store shelves still display yesterday's harvest. Shoppers fill carts with apples and berries. The produce looks normal. The crisis remains invisible. But every flowering fruit tree on the planet has just become permanently barren. Commercial almond orchards stretch across thousands of acres. White and pink blossoms cover every branch. Empty wooden boxes line the orchard roads where beehives should sit humming. An orchard manager's boots echo against the gravel between trees. He stops beneath a flowering almond tree. Each blossom needs repeated visits from bees to produce a single nut. The rule has always been simple: no bees, no almonds. Now that equation reaches its absolute limit. The manager pulls out his phone. His fingers hover over numbers for commercial beekeepers. Several operations that usually provide pollination services. He doesn't call. There's nothing to negotiate anymore. Workers arrive for their morning shift. They stand in small groups between the blooming trees. Their supervisor approaches with news that changes everything. The orchard will continue existing. The trees will keep growing leaves and branches. Next spring, flowers will bloom again. Those flowers will open to empty air. Processing facilities down the road prepare for harvest season. Conveyor belts sit ready. Workers sharpen sorting equipment. Packaging machines wait for nuts that will never come. The trees themselves don't know their purpose has ended. They'll live for decades, blooming beautifully each spring. Their flowers will remain forever unfertilized. Nut production ends instantly, completely. The morning insects disappear. A coffee shop owner unlocks her front door. The espresso machine gleams behind the counter. Regular customers will arrive soon expecting their morning drinks. She doesn't know her business just ended. Coffee plants need insect pollination to produce beans. With the pollinators gone, coffee flowers open and close untouched. The owner checks her inventory. A few weeks of roasted beans remain in storage. When those beans run out, no more will ever be produced. A delivery truck parks outside her shop. The driver unloads boxes of cocoa powder and chocolate syrup. Cacao depends on tiny insects, too. These boxes contain some of the last chocolate products the world will ever see. Inside the shop, customers begin arriving. They order lattes and mochas. Their drinks taste exactly the same as always. The crisis hasn't reached their cups yet. But the industry feeding their addiction has quietly ended. The owner serves each customer normally. Steam rises from coffee cups. The espresso machine hisses. Everything appears routine. Behind the counter, her phone displays an unread message from her bean supplier. Need to discuss supply issues. Coffee cultivation requires specific climatic conditions and pollinating insects. Both Arabica and Robusta depend on small bees and flies. Those pollinators vanish before dawn. Chocolate production faces the same fate. Cacao flowers are tiny. Only tiny midges can pollinate them effectively. Now the flowers open and close unfertilized. Cacao trees become sterile flowering plants. The morning rush continues normally. Customers leave with their drinks. The cash register keeps ringing. By evening, the last coffee and chocolate on earth will be brewing. A grocery store manager arrives before dawn for inventory check. The produce section looks normal. Apples, berries, and tomatoes fill every display. She doesn't realize these are the last of their kind. Food distributors begin calculating available inventory. Pollinator-dependent crops represent a huge chunk of human nutrition. That supply just stopped replacing itself. The manager receives her first price adjustment notice before the store opens. A plus 300% increase effective immediately. Customers start arriving for morning shopping. The first shopper reaches for a bag of almonds. The price tag looks nothing like yesterday's amount. She assumes it's a mistake. The cashier scans the barcode. The register confirms the new price. Arguments begin at checkout lanes. Customers demand explanations for price increases they can't understand. Managers offer explanations. Even they don't fully grasp the shortage yet. A mother reaches the produce section with her shopping list. Apples for her children's lunches now cost more than the family's entire weekly fruit budget. She puts the bag back. Her children will eat differently from now on. Store security guards notice tensions rising. Customers grab items from each other's carts. Voices get louder near the produce displays. A fight breaks out over the last bag of almonds. The store manager locks the nut aisle after another confrontation. Shoppers press against the barriers, demanding access to foods they've bought weekly for years. Some customers begin hoarding. They fill multiple carts with fruit and nuts, clearing entire shelves. Others can't afford a single apple at the new prices. The same scenes repeat at grocery stores worldwide. Food becomes a luxury overnight. A fruit farmer sits in his pickup truck. The engine idles between empty orchard rows. His harvest crew waits for instructions that will never come. The trees around them will never produce fruit again. He turns off the engine. Dozens of workers stand in morning sunlight, holding tools they won't need anymore. The farmer walks over to address his crew. Some have worked this land for years. Their jobs ended when the insects disappeared. The farmer's wife handles the business paperwork. She opens her laptop to draft termination notices. The words feel impossible to type. How do you explain that pollination stopped working? Workers begin removing their name tags and work gloves. They stack unused harvest bins in neat piles. Equipment designed for gathering fruit becomes useless overnight. Ladders, sorting tables, transport containers, all suddenly without purpose. A young worker approaches the farmer. She asks when they'll start pruning trees for next year's harvest. The farmer explains there won't be a next harvest. The concept doesn't make sense to her. Across the region, similar scenes unfold at dozens of orchards and farms. Unemployment claims will spike today. Government offices aren't prepared for mass layoffs in agriculture. The workers drive away slowly. Some will find jobs in grain farming or livestock. Others will leave agriculture forever. An entire profession built around pollinated crops quietly vanishes. The farmer locks his equipment shed. The tools inside will rust before they're needed again. Rural communities begin their transformation into ghost towns. The morning air feels empty of sound. A bird watcher raises her binoculars toward oak trees that should be alive with movement. Her backyard feeder hangs untouched. Cardinals perch motionless on bare branches, their red bodies smaller than yesterday. She adjusts her focus on a robin sitting in grass below the feeder. The bird's head tilts downward, beak probing soil that no longer yields food. Yesterday morning, that same grass teemed with beetles and ants. The robin finds nothing. A blue jay lands nearby. Its usual aggressive energy has vanished. The bird sits quietly, conserving strength it cannot replenish. 3 days pass. The woman finds the first small body beneath her feeder. A wren, its chest hollow from hunger. She picks up the tiny bird with gloved hands. Its bones feel sharp through thin skin. More bodies appear each morning. Sparrows, finches, chickadees. The woman carries them to a growing pile behind her garden shed. Her neighbor starts doing the same. A hawk circles overhead, searching for prey that has already begun dying. Raptors hunt other birds, but their food source shrinks by the hour. Predator birds will follow their prey into starvation. The woman's morning routine changes. She no longer fills bird feeders with seeds. Instead, she walks her yard collecting small corpses that multiply each day. Empty skies begin replacing the dawn chorus. A pond sits silent in the early evening. No frogs call across the water. A park ranger kneels beside cattails where bullfrogs usually gather. The water's surface shows no ripples from diving amphibians. She peers into shallow water near the bank. A bullfrog floats belly up among the reeds. She nets the body and examines it on the muddy shore. The frog's stomach feels empty through its skin. Flies, mosquitoes, and beetles used to hover and crawl near the waterline. Now the air stays clear. The ranger has been finding empty mouths for days. The ranger checks other spots around the pond. She finds salamanders hiding under logs, their bodies noticeably thinner. They move more slowly than usual. Their hunting patterns have become desperate searches for food that doesn't exist. A small lizard scurries between rocks near the water's edge. It pauses frequently, extending its tongue toward empty air. Lizards snap for gnats. Now their tongues find nothing. The ranger documents locations where she finds dead amphibians. Her notebook fills with GPS coordinates and body counts. The tally climbs each day. Mosquito larvae thicken in the shallows. Algae spreads across stagnant water. Wetlands transform from living ecosystems into silent pools of decay. A garden spade breaks through rich soil. The earth feels different beneath the metal blade. A farmer crouches to examine freshly turned dirt that should teem with activity. Instead, tiny bodies litter the dark ground like scattered seeds. She picks up a dead spider with her fingertips. The arachnid's legs curl inward around an empty abdomen. Spiders once waited in webs between plants. Now the threads hang clean and useless. Centipedes lie motionless in the soil. Their segmented bodies normally hunt through underground tunnels. The farmer finds dozens of their corpses in each shovel of dirt. Ground beetles that patrol garden soil at night have stopped moving. These predators once cleared aphids and caterpillars. Now they cluster in dark corners, dying slowly from hunger. Earthworms keep burrowing. Above them, the soil goes quiet. Predatory mites die alongside the spiders and beetles. The ground loses its invisible army of pest controllers. She fills a jar with soil samples. Under a magnifying glass, the earth reveals its transformation. Active hunting grounds become graveyards for tiny predators that kept gardens healthy. Underground, the foundation of agriculture begins crumbling. A river runs brown with floating bodies. Dead fish drift past a water quality station where monitors blink red. A researcher in waders steps into water thick with decay. The current carries trout, bass, and minnows toward the downstream dam. She nets a rainbow trout from the flow. The fish's belly feels hollow. Trout feed primarily on aquatic insects. Mayflies, caddisflies, and midges that emerge from underwater larvae. Those insects finished their cycle days ago. The chain snaps from the bottom up. Insect larvae once fed juvenile fish. Adult insects once skimmed the surface and vanished under quick strikes. Now both links go dark at once. Salmon swimming upstream encounter water littered with corpses. Their spawning journey continues, but they find no food along their route. Fish that should be building strength for reproduction instead burn their remaining fat reserves. The researcher collects water samples in sterile bottles. Bacterial levels spike as decomposing fish release nutrients that overwhelm the water system. Clear mountain streams become cloudy with organic matter. Fishing boats return to harbor with empty nets. Commercial operations discover their livelihood floating dead on the surface. Recreational fishermen find their favorite streams transformed into flowing graveyards. Birds that feed on fish, herons, eagles, ospreys, stand hungry along empty shorelines. The aquatic chain that supported them has dissolved into brown water flowing toward the sea. Rivers become conveyor belts of death. Darkness brings no sound of wings. A cave entrance yawns empty into the night. Thousands of bats should emerge at sunset for their nightly hunt. Instead, silence fills the spaces where echolocation calls once echoed. A bat researcher arrives at the cave with recording equipment. Her microphones detect nothing. The ultrasonic frequencies that filled every summer night have vanished. She points a flashlight into the cave mouth. Bodies litter the cave floor in thick layers. Bats cluster together in their final moments, their wing membranes stretched thin over visible ribs. The researcher counts dozens of corpses near the cave entrance. They hunted moths, beetles, mosquitoes, and gnats in the dark. Tonight the air stays blank and the caves give nothing back. The researcher moves deeper into the cave system. Her light reveals colonies that once numbered in the thousands. Now only dead bats hang from the ceiling, their grip loosening as decomposition begins. Night-flying birds face the same fate. Nightjars, owls, and other nocturnal hunters find empty skies where insect clouds once provided easy feeding. Their hunting calls grow weaker each night. The researcher's equipment records the new sound of night. No bat calls, no moth wing beats, no insect chorus, just wind moving through empty caves and vacant trees. Darkness becomes absolute silence. A park ranger pulls latex gloves over her hands. Dead deer lies beside the hiking trail where it fell weeks ago. Flies should have reduced the carcass to bones by now. Instead, the body sits unchanged except for a sickening smell that grows stronger each day. She kneels beside the deer's remains. The flesh looks almost preserved despite sitting in summer heat. Maggots normally consume dead animals within days. Beetles clean bones. Other insects break down tissue into soil nutrients. None of those decomposers exist anymore. The ranger documents the carcass with her camera. Photo after photo shows meat that refuses to rot properly. Dead animals become permanent fixtures in the landscape. Her radio crackles with reports from other parks. Dead squirrels on benches, birds on sidewalks, all sitting exactly where they died, slowly mummifying instead of decomposing. A jogger covers his nose while passing the deer. The stench follows hikers along trails that once smelled of pine needles and fresh earth. Decay without breakdown creates an unbearable atmosphere. The ranger loads the carcass into her truck bed. Storage areas fill with animal bodies that won't disappear naturally. Cremation becomes the only solution for permanent cleanup. Dead things accumulate faster than living things can remove them. A dairy farmer opens his barn doors at dawn. Manure piles behind cattle stalls where they sat yesterday. Dung beetles should have processed the waste overnight. Instead, fresh cow droppings sit on top of week-old piles that haven't moved. He grabs his shovel and approaches the nearest stall. The manure feels dry and crusty on the surface. Normally, insects break down animal waste within hours. Beetles roll dung into balls. Fly larvae consume organic matter. Other bugs speed decomposition. Those waste processors vanished weeks ago. The farmer's boots stick to the barn floor. Accumulated manure creates a thick layer that builds higher each day. His cows step carefully through waste that should have been recycled into soil nutrients. Outside, pasture fields show the same problem. Cow pies dot the grass like permanent landmarks. The farmer counts dozens in a single paddock. Each pile hardens in the sun instead of breaking down naturally. His neighbor arrives with a front loader tractor. Together they begin scraping manure into massive piles behind the barn. The work that insects once did automatically now requires heavy machinery and endless labor. Feedlots across the region face the same crisis. Waste accumulation threatens to bury livestock operations under their own production. The farmer's phone rings with calls from other ranchers reporting identical problems. Animal agriculture drowns in its own excrement. Dead leaves crunch beneath hiking boots. A forest floor that should feel soft and spongy cracks like broken glass. Autumn leaves from past seasons sit exactly where they fell. The woodland carpet grows thicker each season without anything eating it away. A forestry worker kicks through accumulated debris. Leaves, fallen branches, and dead bark create layers deep in some areas. Termites, beetles, and other decomposer insects normally process this organic matter continuously. The forest's recycling rhythm is gone. She examines fallen logs that should show signs of insect activity. Tiny holes where beetles once bored tunnels remain empty. No larvae tunnel through rotting wood. No insects convert dead trees into soil nutrients. Fallen timber accumulates in dangerous piles. Fire hazards multiply as dry organic matter stacks higher each season. The forest worker documents areas where debris reaches knee-deep levels. Her chainsaw cuts through fallen branches to clear hiking paths. The work requires constant maintenance now. Nature's cleanup crew no longer processes windfall automatically. Young trees struggle to grow through thick mats of undecomposed leaves. Seedlings can't reach soil that lies buried under years of accumulated debris. Forest regeneration slows dramatically. The worker fills data sheets with measurements of debris depth. Each location shows the same pattern: organic matter piling higher, never thinning. Forests suffocate under their own dead skin. A garbage truck rumbles down residential streets. Bins overflow with food waste that should be rotting. Restaurant scraps from weeks ago look almost fresh. The collection crew wears masks against smells that never fade. The driver examines overflowing dumpsters behind restaurants. Vegetable peels, fruit rinds, and meat scraps pile higher than container edges. Organic waste normally breaks down rapidly with help from scavenging insects and decomposer bugs. Those natural cleanup crews disappeared a month ago. Kitchen staff at a nearby restaurant struggle with waste management. Their organic garbage accumulates without decomposing. Banana peels from days ago sit unchanged in compost bins. Apple cores remain intact after days in disposal areas. The crew loads trucks with waste that weighs more than usual. Food scraps that should shrink through natural breakdown maintain their original volume and mass. Garbage ruts take longer to complete. Landfills report unusual conditions. Organic sections that typically compress through decomposition now maintain stable piles. Food waste areas require more space without natural breakdown reducing volume. City sanitation departments hire additional crews. Workers with shovels manually process organic waste that insects once handled automatically. The smell overwhelms treatment facilities designed for naturally decomposing garbage. Residential neighborhoods develop permanent odors from accumulated food waste. Homeowners seal windows against smells that drift from overflowing garbage containers. Cities become monuments to their own consumption. A hospital custodian mops floors that feel stickier each day. Bacteria grows in corners where insect predators once hunted. Microscopic organisms multiply with no natural checks. Her cleaning solutions can't keep pace with accelerating contamination. She notices dark spots spreading along baseboards. Bacterial colonies flourish in hospital environments that previously stayed clean through natural predation. Spiders, ants, and other insects once consumed harmful microorganisms as part of their feeding patterns. Those microscopic hunters vanished with all other insects. The custodian supervisor issues new cleaning protocols. Staff must disinfect surfaces every few hours instead of daily. Chemical usage increases dramatically to replace biological pest control that insects provided automatically. Patient infection rates climb despite increased sanitation efforts. Harmful bacteria multiply freely with no insect predators cutting them down. The hospital's microbiology lab identifies strains that normally remain controlled. Medical staff wear additional protective equipment during routine procedures. Doctors observe longer healing times for wounds that previously closed without complications. Bacterial infections spread more easily between patients. The custodian refills her cleaning cart again this shift. Bottles of disinfectant empty faster than supply orders can refill them. Chemical costs strain hospital budgets designed for normal contamination levels. Air filtration systems work continuously to process bacterial loads that exceed design specifications. Ventilation fans run constantly against microscopic threats that grow unchecked. Invisible threats multiply in every sterile environment. Heat radiates from cracked earth beneath a farmer's boots. His shovel strikes ground that sounds like hitting pavement. Not long ago, this same soil felt soft and crumbly in his hands. Now his blade sparks against dirt that feels baked and solid. He kneels and scrapes at the surface with his pocket knife. The blade barely scratches compacted earth that once welcomed plant roots. Earthworms used to tunnel through this ground. Air pockets and drainage channels used to lace it. Those soil engineers disappeared with every other small creature. The farmer's wife attempts to plant seeds in their vegetable garden. Her hands strain against dirt that resists the simplest digging motions. Seeds dropped into shallow scratches sit on hard, packed earth like pebbles on concrete. Their neighbor arrives with a jackhammer borrowed from construction work. The machine's vibrations barely dent soil that farming equipment can no longer penetrate. What once yielded to gentle hand tools now requires industrial force. Rain pools on the surface instead of soaking into ground. Water runs off hardened fields like liquid sliding down glass. The farmer watches irrigation water flow toward ditches, never sinking where it should. Tree roots that once spread easily through loose soil now grow in twisted patterns above ground. Plants press against earth that feels more like rock than growing medium. The ground rejects everything trying to live in it. A soil scientist opens her field testing kit beside a withered cornfield. pH strips turn colors that make no sense according to her reference chart. Her instruments detect nutrient levels dropping toward zero. The earth beneath her feet has lost the ability to feed anything. She drives her soil probe into hardened ground. The core sample comes up gray and lifeless. Organic matter that should create rich black earth has disappeared. No decomposers move through it. No fresh nutrients return. Her laboratory tests reveal catastrophic changes. Nitrogen readings collapse. Phosphorus sits locked in forms plants cannot use. Essential minerals remain trapped in soil that no longer processes anything. The scientist documents dead zones spreading across agricultural regions. Her GPS coordinates mark areas where soil chemistry has collapsed completely. Each test site shows the same pattern. Vital nutrients fall below levels that support plant growth. A corn plant near her feet shows yellowing leaves despite adequate water and sunlight. Its roots probe desperately through nutrient-starved soil, finding nothing to absorb. The plant slowly starves while standing in what looks like fertile farmland. Commercial fertilizers provide temporary relief. Then rain strips the chemicals away. The soil holds nothing for long. Her data sheets record the transformation of living soil into sterile mineral substrate. Agriculture faces growing in sand instead of earth. Dirt becomes poison to everything trying to grow. A tractor sits idle in a field of dying crops. Its operator walks between corn rows where plants grow smaller each week. Rich black earth that fed his family for generations has turned gray and lifeless. His boots leave no impression in soil hard enough to support heavy machinery. He examines corn stalks that barely reach his waist. Not long ago, similar plants towered over him in healthy soil. These stunted crops struggle against earth that can no longer nurture growth. Their leaves show the pale yellow of malnutrition. The farmer's grandfather's journals describe soil so rich that seeds practically grew themselves. Earthworms, beetles, and countless other soil creatures maintain fertility through their constant activity. That biological support network vanished completely. His wife reviews bank statements in their kitchen. Crop yields have fallen to a small fraction of normal production. Their mortgage payments assume harvests that healthy soil used to guarantee. The numbers no longer balance. Equipment designed for productive farming becomes useless on sterile ground. Planters struggle to place seeds in soil that cannot support germination. Cultivators scrape against earth too hard for normal agricultural tools. The farmer calls his seed supplier to cancel orders. No point planting crops in ground that can no longer grow them. His fields will remain empty this season and every season afterward. His land becomes worthless dirt instead of productive farmland. Wilted leaves hang from oak trees like brown paper bags. A park maintenance worker checks soil around trees that should thrive in summer heat. Her water meter shows adequate moisture in the ground. The trees die of starvation while standing in what appears to be normal earth. She digs around the base of a dying maple. Its roots look pale and thin compared to healthy specimens. No worms, no channels. Tree roots cannot spread through compacted earth. The worker's supervisor examines yellowing grass across the park. Lawn that once grew thick and green now shows bare patches expanding daily. Grass roots probe through soil that offers no nutrition even after fertilizer applications. Her clipboard fills with dead tree locations marked for removal. Healthy specimens that took years to mature now die quickly after the soil collapse. Parks that provided shade and oxygen transform into collections of dying plants. Flower beds require constant replanting as perennials fail to establish root systems in sterile soil. Annual flowers fade once the seed's stored food runs out. Nothing draws nourishment from earth that can no longer provide it. The worker loads dead plants into trucks for disposal. Landscaping that once maintained itself through natural soil cycles now requires complete replacement again and again. Her radio crackles with reports from other parks experiencing identical plant die-offs. Green spaces across the region transform into brown wastelands despite adequate water and sunlight. Plants forget how to live in dead ground. Sand blows across a highway where corn once grew. A meteorologist measures wind patterns carrying topsoil toward distant mountains. His instruments detect dust storms originating from former farmland. Rich agricultural regions transform into expanding deserts within days. He sets up monitoring equipment in what used to be productive farmland. No roots hold the surface. Wind strips away topsoil layer by layer. Years of careful soil building disappear in single storm events. The meteorologist's colleague documents the spreading desert from aerial photographs. Green agricultural areas shrink while brown zones expand at a steady pace. Satellite images show desertification advancing faster than any natural process. Dust clouds from dead farmland create air quality emergencies in nearby cities. Residents wear masks against particulate matter that once supported crops. The atmosphere fills with soil that can no longer sustain life. His weather station records rainfall slipping lower on his charts. The air feels drier each week. Fields stop breathing moisture into the sky. Sand dunes begin forming where wheat fields flourished last season. The meteorologist documents dune migration patterns across former agricultural zones. Desert conditions spread beyond areas that lost soil cover. His final report maps the transformation of a continent. Agricultural regions that fed millions now contribute only to growing dust storms and expanding wastelands. Fertile earth becomes traveling sand. A meadow stretches toward distant hills covered in brilliant flowers. Purple lupins, yellow daisies, and red poppies create a rainbow across the grassland. A botanist walks through blooms more beautiful than any spring in memory. Her notebook records a tragedy disguised as paradise. She kneels beside a cluster of wild roses. Their petals feel soft and perfect between her fingertips. Each flower displays healthy reproductive parts, ready for fertilization. Pollen dusts her hands as she examines the blooms closely. No insect will ever carry that pollen to another flower. The botanist counts empty seed pods on plants that flowered earlier in the season. Countless blooms produce no seeds. She shakes dried pods near her ear. No rattle of future generations sounds from the hollow shells. Her camera captures field after field of sterile beauty. Wildflowers that once scattered seeds across the landscape now bloom in spectacular displays that lead nowhere. Each gorgeous flower represents the end of its family line. Children pick bouquets without understanding they hold the final generation of wild blooms. Their parents encourage the gathering, unaware that no more flowers will replace those taken. The botanist marks GPS coordinates for patches of endangered wildflowers. Species that survived ice ages and human development face extinction through reproductive failure. Their genes will die with the current generation. Nature becomes a museum of living fossils. Morning sun illuminates apple blossoms covering every branch. An orchardist carries pruning shears through rows of flowering trees. Pink and white petals drift like snow around his boots. His trees have never looked more beautiful or been more useless. He examines flower clusters that should develop into fruit within weeks. The blossoms appear perfectly healthy with visible stamens and pistils. His grandfather taught him to recognize signs of successful pollination by tiny changes in flower appearance. Those changes never come anymore. The orchardist's wife photographs their orchard at peak bloom. Tourists arrive to admire the spectacular flowering display. Visitors take selfies among trees that will never again produce apples for harvest festivals. His storage barn sits empty where harvest equipment waits for fruit that will never exist. Picking ladders lean against walls gathering dust. Apple crates stack unused in corners designed for seasonal abundance. The orchardist calls his insurance agent to discuss crop failure claims. The conversation proves difficult. How do you explain that healthy trees refuse to make fruit despite perfect growing conditions? His neighbor arrives with similar questions. Every fruit grower in the valley faces identical problems. Their orchards look magnificent and productive while producing nothing edible. Bank loan payments assume harvests that flourishing trees can no longer provide. Beautiful orchards become financial disasters wrapped in gorgeous petals. Flowering trees mock their owners with empty promises. Tomato plants tower above a gardener's head in raised beds. Yellow flowers dot the green vines like tiny suns. A retired teacher tends plants that grow larger and healthier than ever before. Her harvest baskets sit empty beside vegetables that refuse to reproduce. She pinches tomato blossoms between her fingers. The flowers look perfect with bright yellow petals and visible pollen. Earlier in the season, identical flowers developed into red fruit within weeks of blooming. Now the flowers simply fall off after blooming. The gardener moves between beds checking squash, cucumber, and pepper plants. Every vegetable crop shows the same pattern: abundant, healthy flowering without any fruit development. Her garden has never looked more vigorous or been more unproductive. Her neighbor leans over the fence to admire the lush vegetable growth. They discuss the peculiar season when plants bloom magnificently but produce no food. Neither woman understands the permanent change affecting their gardens. The gardener's freezer contains vegetables from last year's harvest. She rations the frozen produce carefully, unaware she's eating the final generation of home-grown food. Next year's garden will provide only green leaves and empty flowers. Her seed packets sit unopened in storage. No point planting vegetables that cannot produce more seeds for future seasons. The cycle of garden to harvest to seed to garden has broken completely. Vegetable gardens become ornamental displays of flowering plants. An old oak tree drops its final acorns around massive roots. Forest floor beneath ancient branches shows no new tree seedlings. A forest ranger documents the end of natural forest renewal. Her clipboard records the death of woodland succession. She examines acorns scattered beneath old trees. The nuts look normal and healthy. Squirrels gather them for winter storage as always. But these acorns represent the last generation their parent trees will ever produce. No new oak seedlings push through forest soil despite abundant acorn production from previous years. The ranger finds dried acorns from last season that failed to germinate. Perfect seeds that cannot become trees. Her trail map marks locations of aging tree stands with no young growth. Forests that once renewed themselves through continuous seedling production now face gradual extinction as old trees die without replacement. The ranger's radio crackles with reports from other forests showing identical patterns. Maple, pine, and birch trees flower normally but produce no viable seeds for future forests. Woodland reproduction has ended completely. Children hiking with school groups admire ancient trees without understanding they're seeing the final generation. These forests will exist only until old trees reach the end of their natural lifespans. The ranger's data shows woodland age distribution, skewing dramatically toward mature trees. New young forest growth appears in any surveyed location. Succession stops at the current generation. Forests become senior homes for dying trees. Wind-pollinated grasses wave across hillsides where wildflowers once bloomed. An ecology researcher counts species in plots that used to support dozens of plant varieties. Her field guide identifies only a few types of vegetation where rich variety flourished last year. Complex plant communities simplify into monotonous green carpets. She marks plant identification stakes in research plots. Grass species that reproduce without insects now dominate areas where diverse flowering plants once created complex ecosystems. Self-pollinating grains spread across vacant ecological niches. The researchers' photographs document the transformation of biodiverse meadows into simplified grasslands. Species that required insect pollinators disappear while wind-pollinated varieties expand unchecked. Her laptop contains databases showing regional plant diversity collapsing to a handful of species. Ecosystems that evolved over millennia unravel within months of pollinator extinction. Students on field trips learn to identify a few grass types instead of a meadow full of wildflower names. Educational materials become obsolete as biological complexity disappears from textbooks and landscapes. The researcher's final report documents the most rapid biodiversity loss in geological history. Plant communities that survived ice ages and climate changes cannot survive the absence of insects. Her colleagues review data showing similar patterns worldwide. Complex plant ecosystems collapse into simplified grass monocultures across every continent. Living landscapes become biological deserts of repetitive green. A microbiologist adjusts her microscope focus in the university laboratory. Bacterial colonies spread across Petri dishes faster than she can count them. Samples from local soil show microorganism densities that break her measurement scales. Her hands shake as she records numbers that shouldn't exist in nature. She pipettes water from a nearby pond onto fresh culture plates. Within hours, harmful bacteria multiply to levels that normally take weeks to develop. Her laboratory cultures grow so rapidly they consume nutrients before she can replenish them. The microbiologist's colleague examines similar samples under higher magnification. Pathogenic microbes that usually remain controlled by predator insects now flourish without natural enemies. Disease, causing organisms spread unchecked through environments where they once faced constant hunting pressure. Her phone buzzes with calls from hospital laboratories reporting similar findings. Medical facilities document bacterial infections that resist standard treatments. Microbes that previously stayed contained now overwhelm human immune systems weakened by constant exposure. Students working late in the laboratory wear double masks against airborne pathogens that drift from overflowing culture dishes. The building's ventilation system struggles to process contamination levels it was never designed to handle. The microbiologist seals her final samples in biohazard containers. Her research notes document the most rapid pathogen population explosion in recorded medical history. Every measurement confirms the same terrifying pattern. Invisible predators vanish while invisible killers multiply beyond counting. Body temperature reads 102 degrees on the thermometer. A family doctor examines her fourth fever patient this morning. Each person shows symptoms of infections that healthy immune systems normally fight off easily. Her waiting room fills with patients whose bodies can no longer defend themselves. She listens to labored breathing through her stethoscope. The patient's lungs struggle against bacterial infections that should clear within days. His immune system fights continuous battles against pathogens that once remained harmless background presence. The doctor's prescription pad depletes rapidly as she writes antibiotic orders for infections that multiply faster than medications can control them. Standard treatments prove inadequate against microbial loads that exceed normal exposure levels. Her nurse reports similar cases flooding emergency rooms across the region. Patients arrive with multiple simultaneous infections that healthy immune systems once handled automatically. Children develop serious illnesses from germs that previously caused minor sniffles. The doctor's own throat feels scratchy after exposure to dozens of infected patients each day. Medical professionals face the same immune system stress as their communities. Protective equipment provides limited defense against pathogen concentrations in contaminated air. Hospital beds fill with patients requiring extended treatment for infections that once resolved quickly. Medical facilities strain under patient loads that exceed capacity designed for normal disease patterns. Her appointment book shows no open slots for 2 weeks as infection rates climb beyond medical system capacity. Bodies surrender to enemies they once defeated without effort. Chemical residue coats leaves in a residential neighborhood. An environmental inspector samples air quality near a factory that operated safely for decades. Her detector readings spike beyond acceptable levels for substances that natural processes once neutralized. Warning lights blink red on instruments calibrated for normal environmental conditions. She collects soil samples from areas where children played safely last year. Industrial chemicals that insects once broke down now accumulate in dangerous concentrations. Her test kit reveals toxin levels that require immediate evacuation warnings. The inspector's supervisor reviews data from monitoring stations across the region. Chemical compounds that biological systems once processed naturally now persist in air, water, and soil. Environmental cleanup crews work continuously to remove contamination that previously disappeared through natural breakdown. Her radio crackles with emergency calls from schools reporting illness among students exposed to contaminated playground areas. Facilities that met all safety standards now pose health risks due to accumulated toxins. Residents pack belongings as evacuation orders extend to neighborhoods previously considered safe. The inspector posts warning signs around areas where toxic accumulation exceeds human tolerance levels. Her final report recommends permanent relocation for communities surrounded by industrial contamination that nature can no longer process. Chemical safety margins collapse when biological cleanup systems disappear. Poison builds where life once cleansed itself automatically. Dark spots spread across rose leaves in a botanical garden. A plant pathologist examines fungal infections consuming flower beds that thrived for decades. Disease patterns advance through gardens faster than her treatments can control them. Her spray equipment empties daily against plant pathogens that face no natural predators. She documents disease progression with her camera. Fungal infections that beneficial insects once contained now devastate entire plant collections. Her greenhouse specimens show similar symptoms despite controlled growing conditions. The pathologist's assistant reports crop failures at farms across 3 states. Plant diseases spread unchecked through agricultural areas where beneficial insects previously maintained biological pest control. Fungicide applications prove insufficient against pathogen loads that exceed treatment capacity. Her laboratory cultures reveal disease organisms multiplying at rates that overwhelm plant immune systems. Pathogens that remain balanced within natural ecosystems now consume vegetation without biological controls limiting their spread. Garden centers close as ornamental plants succumb to diseases that propagate faster than replacement plantings can establish. The pathologist's phone rings constantly with requests for treatments that cannot match infection rates. Her research notes document the collapse of natural disease resistance in plant communities worldwide. Agricultural advisors recommend abandoning crop production in regions where plant pathogens multiply beyond chemical control methods. Green spaces transform into galleries of dying vegetation. Cattle scratch constantly against fence posts in a ranch pasture. A veterinarian counts tick clusters on animals that used to graze peacefully. Parasites cover livestock in numbers that overwhelm their host animals' survival capacity. Her medical bag contains insufficient treatments for infestations that multiply beyond medication effectiveness. She examines a horse whose coat shows bare patches from constant scratching. Parasites that insectivorous birds once controlled now reproduce without natural predators, reducing their populations. Each animal hosts parasite colonies that drain blood faster than healthy bodies can replenish it. The veterinarian's truck radio receives distress calls from ranchers reporting livestock deaths from parasite overload. Animals that survived previous parasite seasons now collapse under infestations that exceed biological tolerance levels. Her clinic operates beyond capacity, treating pets and livestock that arrive covered in ticks, fleas, and other parasites. Standard parasite control medications prove inadequate against population explosions that occur without natural predator controls. Wildlife officials document similar patterns in deer, elk, and other wild animals. Rangers discover animal corpses bearing parasite loads that suggest death from blood loss rather than disease or injury. The veterinarian's supply orders increase weekly as parasite treatment demands exceed normal usage by massive margins. Pharmaceutical companies cannot manufacture medications fast enough to match escalating parasite populations. Her patient records show infection rates that threaten species survival across multiple animal populations. Tiny vampires drain life from every warm-blooded creature. Bleeding gums stain a toothbrush pink in a suburban bathroom. A mother examines her daughter's teeth that wobble loose in swollen gums. Fresh fruits and vegetables disappeared from stores months ago. Her child's body shows signs of diseases that vanished from modern medicine decades ago. The mother opens her medicine cabinet searching for vitamin supplements that sold out weeks ago. Her daughter's skin shows purple bruises that appear without injury. Tiny blood vessels break under skin that lacks nutrients once provided by pollinated crops. Her neighbor's children show similar symptoms. A boy's teeth fell out during breakfast yesterday. His parents search desperately for foods containing vitamins that prevented scurvy in sailors centuries ago. She calls her pediatrician's office. The receptionist explains that appointment slots for nutritional disorders now come with long waiting periods. Medical professionals document diseases they learned about only in history textbooks. Her daughter's legs develop painful swelling. Simple cuts refuse to heal properly. The child's immune system weakens under malnutrition that modern populations never experienced. Hospital emergency rooms fill with patients displaying symptoms of diseases eliminated through agricultural abundance. Doctors prescribe treatments for conditions they never expected to encounter in developed countries. She rations the last orange in their refrigerator. Her daughter needs vitamin C that no longer exists in their diet. Bodies remember hungers their ancestors escaped through farming. Dollar bills stacked beside a single apple on a grocery store checkout counter. A cashier watches customers count money for fruit that costs more than their weekly food budget. Wealthy shoppers fill carts while working families stare at prices they cannot afford. Food becomes luxury that divides communities along economic lines. She observes elderly customers putting back apples after seeing price tags. Their fixed incomes cannot accommodate food inflation that transforms basic nutrition into expensive indulgence. They purchase bread and pasta that provide calories without vitamins. A businessman pays cash for organic produce without checking prices. His cart contains fruits and nuts that cost more than retail workers earn in full shifts. He loads groceries into a luxury car, while other customers walk home with empty hands. Her lunch break approaches. Her employee discount cannot make fresh produce affordable on retail wages. She eats instant noodles while scanning expensive fruits she cannot purchase. Security guards monitor increased shoplifting attempts as desperate families attempt to feed children with food they cannot buy legally. She pretends not to notice parents slipping apples into coat pockets. Her register records the new economy where nutrition correlates directly with wealth. Rich families maintain healthy diets while poor communities develop malnutrition diseases previously seen only in developing regions. The store's layout adapts to economic segregation. Expensive fresh produce occupies premium sections, while processed foods fill discount aisles. Money determines who lives and who slowly starves. Empty houses line a main street where businesses once thrived. A sheriff drives through a farming town that lost much of its population in weeks. For sale signs stand in yards where no one comes to buy. His radio receives no calls from communities that have simply emptied out. He stops at the abandoned diner where farmers used to gather for morning coffee. Windows show dust accumulating on tables set for customers who will never return. The owner moved to the city after crop failures destroyed local agriculture. The sheriff checks empty farmhouses where families lived for generations. Kitchen gardens show dead plants that could not reproduce. Orchards stand leafless and abandoned beside homes their owners could no longer afford. His patrol car passes the closed elementary school. Children left with their parents when farming jobs disappeared. The building sits empty with playground equipment rusting in yards where no children play. Bank offices display foreclosure notices on properties that have no buyers. Agricultural land without productive capacity holds no value for investors. Real estate markets collapse when the foundation of rural economy disappears. The sheriff's jurisdiction shrinks as residents relocate to urban areas seeking employment that still exists. His calls for backup reach empty police stations in towns where no one remains to protect. His final radio check receives no response from neighboring departments that closed when their communities dissolved. Rural America becomes a collection of abandoned monuments to agriculture. Cargo ships sit empty at a port where grain exports once departed daily. A customs official reviews trade documents for food shipments that no longer exist. Countries that fed the world not long ago now import basic nutrition for their own populations. Her computer screen shows cancellation notices for agricultural contracts that cannot be fulfilled. She processes emergency food aid requests from nations that previously exported surplus crops to global markets. International trade relationships reverse as agricultural exporters become desperate importers seeking basic nutrition for their citizens. The officials' colleagues monitor increased security activity around remaining food production facilities. Nations deploy state units to protect agricultural resources that determine population survival. Border tensions escalate over access to crops that still produce edible harvests. Her radio receives updates about commercial shipping disruptions caused by conflicts over food trade routes. Patrol ships escort grain shipments through waters where economic partners have become competitors for limited nutritional resources. Diplomatic cables flood her communication systems with emergency negotiations between countries scrambling over agricultural imports. International law struggles to address resource disputes that threaten population survival rather than economic advantage. The official documents the transformation of peaceful trade relationships into desperate competitions for population survival. Economic partnerships dissolve when agricultural abundance disappears. Her final report describes the fastest collapse of international cooperation in recorded diplomatic history. Hungry nations abandon diplomacy for survival conflicts. Ration cards replace cash at a government distribution center. A clerk stamps papers that determine who eats and who goes hungry. Democratic processes disappear when survival depends on administrative decisions. His rubber stamp controls life and death with each purple mark on bureaucratic forms. He processes applications from families requesting increased food allocations for children showing malnutrition symptoms. Government regulations specify exactly how much nutrition each citizen receives based on occupation and social status. His supervisor reviews lists of citizens whose food privileges have been suspended for political dissent. Food distribution becomes a tool for controlling population behavior when agricultural abundance no longer provides automatic nutrition security. His office windows overlook bread lines that stretch for city blocks. Citizens wait hours for government-controlled food portions that replace free market access to nutrition. Military personnel supervise distribution to prevent riots over insufficient supplies. Identity cards determine food access levels based on government loyalty ratings. The clerk processes documents that divide citizens into nutritional classes based on political compliance rather than need or ability to pay. His final paperwork authorizes emergency food reductions for populations that cannot contribute to agricultural recovery efforts. Starvation becomes governmental policy when democratic institutions cannot solve food scarcity. The clerk locks his desk drawers containing papers that decide which citizens live through the next week. Freedom dies when governments control every meal. Brown leaves crackle beneath a botanist's boots in what used to be a forest preserve. Dead trees stretch toward gray skies like skeleton fingers. Her camera captures landscapes that look like photographs from other planets. Green has disappeared from every direction she turns her lens. She documents the progression of plant death across continents. Trees that survive droughts, diseases, and human development succumb to reproductive failure and soil collapse. Her GPS coordinates mark locations where forests once provided oxygen and shelter. The botanist's measuring tape records the expansion of dead zones where nothing grows anymore. Grasslands that supported wildlife for millennia now show only brown stubble that crumbles at her touch. Her soil probe strikes ground harder than concrete beneath layers of dead vegetation. Plant roots that once held earth together have dried into brittle networks. They provide no stability for the remaining soil layers. Children who visit the preserve with school groups ask why all the plants look dead. Their teachers struggle to explain landscapes that textbooks still describe as living ecosystems. The botanist's final photographs show the same pattern across every climate zone. Tropical rainforests, temperate woodlands, and Arctic tundra all transition toward identical brown wastelands. Her research notes document the fastest vegetation extinction in geological history. Living green becomes memory preserved only in old photographs. A weather station records rainfall measurements that barely register on calibrated instruments. A climatologist reviews data showing precipitation levels dropping towards zero across regions that once received abundant water. Her computer models predict permanent drought conditions spreading beyond any historical climate patterns. Desert weather expands into areas that supported agriculture for thousands of years. She examines satellite images showing brown expanding across continents where green once dominated. Plants stop breathing moisture into the air. The weather dries out and stays that way. The climatologist's colleagues report similar findings from monitoring stations worldwide. Clouds thin over places where skies used to build. Rain systems weaken, then fail to return. Her barometric instruments detect changes in atmospheric pressure that accompany expanding drought conditions. Weather systems that once brought seasonal rains now bypass regions that cannot support precipitation cycles. Farmers who depended on regular rainfall watch empty skies that promise no relief for dying crops. Irrigation systems draw from underground water sources that drop lower each week without surface water replenishment. The climatologist's weather predictions extend drought warnings indefinitely into future forecasts. No atmospheric conditions suggest returning to precipitation patterns that supported agriculture. Her final report describes planetary climate transformation from temperate to desert conditions within half a year. Earth's weather forgets how to make rain. An oxygen meter displays readings that make a respiratory therapist check her equipment twice. Air samples from cities show declining oxygen concentrations that affect human breathing patterns. Her patients require supplemental oxygen for activities they performed normally months ago. Atmospheric composition shifts faster than her monitors can settle. She monitors patients who experience shortness of breath during routine walking. Their lungs struggle against air that contains less oxygen than human respiratory systems evolved to process. Hospital oxygen supplies deplete faster as demand increases across patient populations. The therapist's equipment records atmospheric changes that force constant recalibration. Oxygen concentrators work harder to extract breathable air from atmosphere that grows thinner each week. Her colleagues report increased respiratory distress among healthy adults who never experienced breathing difficulties. Athletes cannot maintain performance levels in air that lacks sufficient oxygen for intense physical activity. Emergency rooms treat patients with symptoms resembling high-altitude sickness despite living at sea level. Medical professionals observe breathing difficulties in populations that lived normally in these locations for generations. The therapist's shift reports document rising oxygen therapy requirements across patient demographics that previously breathed normally without assistance. Her supervisor orders additional oxygen supplies to meet demand that increases faster than delivery systems can provide support. Breathing becomes work that bodies must learn to perform consciously. Bones bleach white in a safari park where herds once grazed peacefully. A wildlife biologist counts animal carcasses scattered across grasslands that no longer support any living creatures. Her field notebook records the end of food chains that sustained animal populations for millions of years. Nothing moves except wind blowing through empty landscapes where wildlife once thrived. She examines the skeletal remains of herbivores that starved when vegetation died completely. Predator animals followed their prey into extinction as food sources disappeared entirely. Her camera captures evidence of ecosystem collapse that occurred within weeks of plant death. The biologist's radio receives no reports of animal sightings from reserve that once hosted abundant wildlife. Rangers document empty habitats where animals lived in complex social groups until food chains snapped completely. Her tracking equipment detects no animal movement across territories that supported diverse species months ago. Migration routes show no animal passage. Breeding grounds remain empty during seasons when animals once gathered for reproduction. Zoos struggle to feed captive animals as commercial feed production stops. Even protected animals face starvation when agricultural systems cannot provide nutrition for any living creature. The biologist's final survey finds 0 animal populations surviving in ecosystems that once supported millions of individual creatures across hundreds of species. Her research concludes the loss happened in half a year. Wildlife built over ages vanishes in one season. Wilderness becomes graveyards with no mourners to remember the dead. A microscope reveals empty water droplets where microorganisms once teemed with activity. A microbiologist examines samples from oceans, rivers, and soil that show biological life approaching extinction levels. Her Petri dishes grow nothing despite containing nutrients that should support abundant microbial growth. Life itself retreats toward a few hardy bacteria that survive in the most extreme environments. She documents the disappearance of microscopic life that forms the foundation of all biological systems. Plankton populations crash in oceans that lose their capacity to support marine ecosystems. Her samples reveal water that appears chemically suitable for life but contains no living organisms. The microbiologist's colleagues report similar findings from research stations worldwide. Soil samples show dramatic decreases in bacterial and fungal populations that normally process organic matter and maintain Earth's biological cycles. Her laboratory cultures require multiple attempts to grow anything from environmental samples that once produced abundant microbial life. Even the hardiest microorganisms struggle to survive in environments that lack the complex biological networks they depend on. Students learning biology study textbook descriptions of ecosystems that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Their microscopes reveal sterile samples where previous generations of students observed complex biological communities. The microbiologist's research notes document the most rapid biodiversity collapse in planetary history. Species counts approach numbers that suggest biological systems cannot recover naturally. Her final analysis predicts biological diversity falling to levels that cannot support complex life forms. Earth becomes a sterile planet orbiting through space like a beautiful corpse.